Hello again, everybody. Today we're looking at classifying polygons. Now, the word polygon is a Greek word. It means many angles. So we're going to be looking at some shapes that have many angles, and we're going to be figuring out how can we classify all these shapes and what is it exactly that a polygon is. So first off, let's start off by looking at some of the more common polygons that we have. So here you can see that we have a bunch of different polygons. Some of these you guys probably already know really well already. For example, a triangle and a quadrilateral, you probably know those. You probably also know hexagons and octagons. Some of these other ones may not be so familiar, but as you can see, most often polygons are classified by the number of sides that they have. So a triangle has 3 sides, the tri, meaning tri, 3 sides, or 3 angles. Quadrilateral, quad, that's the root word for 4. Pentagon, pent is also meaning 5, and so on and so forth. So these are some of the polygons that you guys are going to need to know for the rest of this year. And we're going to specifically look today at, we're going to review triangles really briefly, and then we're going to look at quadrilaterals. So let's go ahead and get started on that. So as you can see here, we have the different triangles that we talked about previously, right triangles, acute triangles, and obtuse triangles. All of those are named off of the different angles that the triangles have. And then we also have equilateral, isosceles, and scalene triangles, which are named based on the sides and how many sides are congruent or equal to each other. So that's how we classify our triangles, and now let's look at how we're going to classify quadrilaterals. So what we have here is kind of a little tree figure that that kind of gives us a pathway of how we can look at what a quadrilateral is and how we can define it. So what we need to remember first is quadrilateral, the word quadrilateral. The root word quad right here means 4. So all quadrilaterals have 4 sides. The way that we differentiate between the different quadrilaterals is what we're going to look at today. So first let's look at the trapezoid. It's over here on the right hand side. A trapezoid, the way that we can tell whether or not something is a trapezoid is whether the figure, the 4-sided figure, has 2 lines that are parallel to each other. So as you can see on the trapezoid, the top and the bottom of that trapezoid are parallel lines. Therefore, we know that since they are parallel lines, that those 2 lines form a trapezoid. Now within the trapezoid, there are 2 other types of trapezoid that are relatively common, so they've earned their own names. One of them is the isosceles trapezoid. And the isosceles trapezoid, if you guys remember from when we talked about triangles, isosceles triangles have 2 sides that are equal. The same thing is true of an isosceles trapezoid. If you have 2 sides of an isosceles trapezoid that are the same length, then you have an isosceles trapezoid. So we had two sides that are the same length, and then we also have the top and the bottom of the trapezoid, which are parallel. So that makes it an isosceles trapezoid. Now for the last trapezoid that we're going to look at, as you can see, it's a right trapezoid. And in case you hadn't figured this out just yet, a right trapezoid has a right angle. And since it's a one right angle, there will always be a second right angle. But a right trapezoid has right angles, and of course, the defining feature of trapezoids is that it has the 2 sides that are parallel. And once again, it's the top and the bottom of the trapezoid. So this is how we define what a trapezoid is. It has 2 sides that are parallel, and then we can break that apart further by saying either it's an isosceles trapezoid, which means 2 sides are parallel, the top and the bottom are parallel, and then it also has the angled sides, which are the same length. The other type of trapezoid is the right trapezoid, which has right angles, and, of course, the 2 parallel sides. So that's one branch of our tree, and now we're going to go over and look at the other branch. The left-hand side over here is figures that you're much more probably much more comfortable with, much more familiar with. And what we're going to look at first is a parallelogram. So a parallelogram, what makes them interesting is that the parallelogram has opposite sides that are parallel, and it's all four sides. So whereas the trapezoid only had two parallel sides, the parallelogram, all the sides are parallel with the one opposite. So that's what makes it a parallelogram, is parallel sides. As we move down from the parallelogram, you need to make sure that you understand that everything underneath it is also called a parallelogram. So even though we would call this next figure a rectangle, because we're used to calling it a rectangle, it's actually a parallelogram also. Because if we look at it, the top and bottom of the rectangle are parallel, as are the two sides of, sorry about that, as are the two sides of the rectangle. They are also parallel. The difference with a rectangle and a normal parallelogram is that in a rectangle, it has four 90-degree angles as well as the parallel sides. So that's how we tell the difference between a parallelogram and a rectangle, is we just make that one extra clarification. If we move instead of to the left from the parallelogram, if we go to the right, you find the rhombus. And a rhombus is a parallelogram, just like everything else that we have on this side of the tree. The only difference with a rhombus is all four sides of the rhombus are equal lengths. So the angles are not necessarily 90-degree angles, but all four sides of the rhombus are the same length. Lastly, we have probably one of the most common figures that you guys have dealt with since you've been learning about shapes since you were little kids, is the square. And I'm pretty sure you guys already know this, but just in case you don't, a square, what makes it special is all four sides of the square are the same length, just like the rhombus. However, unlike the rhombus, all the angles of a square are also 90 degrees. So it's a combination of a rectangle and a rhombus. So there we have the different types of quadrilaterals that we're dealing with, and remember that a quadrilateral has four sides, and we can break that apart into two separate branches, and from those two branches we can kind of sort out all the different types of shapes of quadrilaterals that we could have. So our next step would be moving on and seeing what else we need to excuse me, moving on and seeing what other types of quadrilaterals, or other types of polygons rather, we need to be aware of. So let's go ahead and we'll finish this up and look at the last thing that we need to talk about. And in our final thing that we're going to talk about, we're just going to talk really quickly about regular polygons. A polygon, like we said before, was a many-angled figure. Typically, anything triangle or bigger is a polygon. When we talk about regular polygons, what we're really talking about is a polygon that has all sides of the same length. So, for example, if we were looking at triangles, we would be talking about an equilateral triangle, like this one here. So as you can see on that triangle, we have all three sides are the same length, and all three angles on the inside are also the same. So that is a regular triangle. A regular triangle, like we should hopefully remember, is also called an equilateral triangle. Now, if we are talking about a regular four-sided polygon, what do you guys think we might be talking about there? Hopefully, you all said a square. And as you can see, just like with an equilateral triangle, a square is a regular polygon because all the sides are the same length and all the angles are the same. And moving on from here, it's just these two have special names rather than just saying a regular triangle or a regular quadrilateral. We call them a equilateral triangle or a square. And from this point on, it would be a regular pentagon, a regular hexagon, a regular septagon, etc. Through all the names of all the figures that we saw in our first beginning of this whole lesson, or even beyond that to 20-sided, 40-sided, however many sided figures there are, that's what we would call a regular polygon, is anything that has the same length on each side and the same angle. So that just about does it for this lesson. Tomorrow we're going to look at some more in-depth things that we can do with different types of polygons, both triangles, quadrilaterals, all of those, and we will continue tomorrow. I will see you guys in class.